Hi, my name is Katherine Nasol. My main research question is how and why Filipino migrant workers are trafficked from the Philippines to the sending countries. And just to give a brief introduction of who I am, I've been trying to research this question for the past year. My interest in this topic usually stems from my own family history of my parents being overseas Filipino workers working in Kuwait. And also having other relatives work here as mail order brides or as caregivers, and understanding the intersection between human trafficking and immigration and migration. And so just to give a brief roadmap of my presentation, I already introduced my topic. I'll also give a brief background of what human trafficking is and how it relates to the Philippine context. I'll be sharing what I did last summer in the East Coast, and also what I did this summer in which I traveled to Hong Kong and also Long Beach to meet other Filipino migrant workers all over the world. I'll then talk on my lessons and challenges and then moving forward. So just to give a brief background of what human trafficking is, it is essentially the trade and exploitation of human beings. So according to the Palermo Protocol, it includes three different aspects. So one of them is the act, so recruitment, transportation, transferring, harboring, or receipt of a human being. The means include threats, deception, fraud, and the purpose could be for slavery, forced labor, prostitution, and sexual exploitation, and also the purpose could also include domestic servitude. In terms of the Philippine context, the conditions of the Philippines are that there's so much unemployment and a lack of employment for a lot of Filipino citizens, and so it's difficult for them to find a job in the home country. And so because of such conditions, they are forced to work abroad because there are a lack of jobs in the Philippines. And so those conditions are exacerbated by the labor export policy. And so it's a set of conditions and regulations and laws set by the Philippine government to encourage their citizens to go abroad. And so that might sound weird because why would a country want brain drain essentially? It's also because of remittances. So instead of working on creating more employment, instead people who are abroad can send back remittances and keep the Philippine economy afloat. So with that in mind, last summer I went to the East Coast and traveled to New York, Washington DC, and New Orleans to meet with Filipino migrant workers. And they all come from different industries. In New York it was mostly domestic caregivers. New Orleans was trafficked oil rig workers. In Washington DC it was trafficked teachers. So trafficking really spans all these different types of industries and companies. So what I did over there, I interviewed a lot of migrant workers, anti-trafficking advocates, lawyers, and community organizers, and also led and participated in anti-trafficking rallies, helped participate in leading an international migrant rights conference, and community meetings. And so this is a picture from last October. Last October was the International Assembly for Migrants and Refugees, where people from Nigeria, the Philippines, Latin America, all over came to New York in protest against the United Nations Global Forum on Migration and Development. And they protested mostly because they were propagating the idea that migration is a tool for development in developed countries. But in reality, it actually separates families, it creates undocumentation for a lot of people in the sending countries, and it leads to lots of labor rights abuses. And so this is the group of people who are in front of the United Nations right now and wanted to expose the realities of what it's like to be a migrant worker, to be a migrant refugee. And so this summer, last summer, prompted me to go to Hong Kong, where there are over 300,000 migrant workers. And so that includes not only Filipinos, but people who come from Thailand, from Indonesia. And so this is a picture of one of our rallies, and this is a cultural migrant workers grassroots organization. And so what they do is that they express their experiences as a migrant through cultural dance. And so they're doing a cultural dance right now in one of these rallies. So in Hong Kong, my main research project was to determine how are Indonesian and Filipino migrant workers trafficked from their home countries to Hong Kong. So I also participated in rallies that propagated or asked for raising the minimum wage and also increased labor rights protections. helped out with Know Your Rights presentations and health service fairs, and also worked with lots of migrant groups, nonprofits, and NGOs. And so this is a picture of one of our health fairs. So the Thai Regional Alliance in Hong Kong gave Thai massages to a lot of the domestic workers on Sundays. And usually every Sunday is the only day off that all migrant workers in Hong Kong get to have. And usually they work 6 days a week, mostly 24/7. And so every Sunday we try and give these services to help these workers relax and kind of feel human. And this is another rally in a protest in support for Palestinians during the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So a lot of these are Indonesian migrant workers, Filipino migrant workers, and there's also an International Migrants Alliance that is based in Hong Kong too, so we were able to kind of build international support. And then lastly, after 2 months in Hong Kong, I went to Long Beach, lots of traveling, and I visited the Filipino Migrant Center down there, and so they've also been receiving lots of cases of trafficked migrant workers, especially in care homes. And this is a picture from our faith witnessing, where people in the faith communities in Long Beach are able to gather and also meet workers who have experienced trafficking. So I also did interviews with workers and organizers, helped facilitate meetings with grassroots migrant groups, and helped organize the faith witnessing. And this is just a week in Long Beach too. It was very busy. And so just to summarize a lot of the findings that I gathered internationally, I organized this in terms of the definition of trafficking, which is act, a means, and a purpose. So this is mostly a brief overview of what is the experience of a lot of migrant workers when they're being trafficked. So first of all, in the Philippines, a lot of agencies try and publicize different job opportunities abroad, and so that's how they formally recruit Filipino citizens. They then transport the workers to the sending countries, often controlling their visas and passports. So often these agencies ask them for their passport, and so that's like a level of power dynamics against the worker and the agency. And agencies can even harbor new recruits. In Indonesia, a lot of agencies in Indonesia keep a lot of citizens in one area for several months until they get a job order, and then they can ship them off to Hong Kong or anywhere around the world in order to fulfill that job order. And then the means, a lot of agencies use fraud, coercion, and deception to convince citizens to accept these jobs. So for example, they may say that you can get $15 to $16 per hour, and if you need help, you can go to this lending corporation, you can get a loan. But often these loans are shams. A lot of these recruitment fees that they pay to the agency are illegal, and a lot of workers enter a cycle of debt bondage. They can also use threat or use of force, such as passport confiscation and harassment against the migrant workers and their families if they don't pay, and to make them compliant. And lastly, the main reason why a lot of people are trafficked is mainly to fulfill job orders in developed countries and also places like Saudi Arabia or Libya. And so there's lots of labor injustices that happen, such as working 15 to 16-hour work days and get only paid $2 to $3 an hour. They're not receiving enough food. We've had cases in Hong Kong where a lot of workers slept on top of toilets or slept on the bathroom floor, and also experienced sexual assault. And also, people do not voluntarily consent to work in these conditions. Even though they accept these job orders, they did not ask to work 15 to 16 hours a day. They did not ask to live in these and work in these conditions. And also, the sending countries' policy gaps also exacerbate the poor labor environment. For example, in Hong Kong, there's a 2-week rule. So if you are terminated before your 2-year contract, you can be deported after 2 weeks. And I think the policies here in the US are very similar, where there's lots of undocumentation and it's really difficult to get services. So that's mostly the summary. And for the overall conclusions, trafficking is usually a result of unjust global and national policies in both the Philippines and also in sending countries. The root causes of exploitation really begin in the Philippines, and a lot of the solutions are found and best led by Filipino migrant workers. So not only rallies but also partnering up with nonprofits and service providers and NGOs who can provide an academic basis as to why migrant workers are experiencing these conditions. So some major lessons I learned from the past year and mostly from the summer is to constantly ask questions, take initiative, and build reciprocal relationships with the workers, and not see them as you're a worker, I'm a student, but to see them as human beings and as friends. Essentially, in Hong Kong, a lot of the workers were my family away from home, and they were my ates, and ate in Tagalog means like older sister, and so they were really the ones who took care of me, and so that reciprocity was really important in the work that I was doing. Major challenges were language differences. My Tagalog skills, or the Philippine national language, were okay, and so it was difficult for me to sometimes communicate with the workers because they felt more comfortable talking about their conditions in Tagalog, but I only knew a little bit. And also other challenges were seeing differences in subunits and issues of privilege and action. And so when I was in Hong Kong, I kind of felt a little bit weird being a Stanford student going into these conditions, and I didn't know where to take action, where to take initiative, and so outwardly that seemed to me, to my community partner, that I wasn't interested, but it was mostly just me dealing with this internal struggle. But I think I realized that it has to be reciprocal, and that relationship between my partner and me had to meet halfway. In terms of future next steps, this entire topic is my honors thesis. I'm still trying to figure out my research argument, and hopefully I want to disseminate this information into something useful, like a Know Your Rights booklet, community celebration, and hopefully work with partners that can have a national or international impact. Thank you.